Press the button, my friend.
Here's something off the request line.
This thing working? Give me some sound over here.
Classic rock. This is a song of hope.
Now we will begin.
We have ignition.
Classic rock. He's classic rock.
101% classic rock. Taking you back. Oh, man.
Welcome to the Classic Rockcast, the podcast that covers all things classic rock.
Welcome to the Classic Rockcast. My guest tonight is a guy who hosts a podcast called One on One. I just want to, before I tell you who it is, I want to run down the list of guests he has had on this show. Alice Cooper, Ace Frehley from KISS, Rob Halford from Judas Priest, Steve Hackett of Genesis, Scott Ian of Anthrax, Mick Box from Uriah Heep, which is one that surprised me a little, Bruce Kulick from KISS, Ted Nugent, Glenn Hughes of Deep Purple, Stephen Pearcy of Rat, Kirk Hammet from Metallica. I could go on, but I just want to say, Mitch Lafon, welcome to the Classic Rockcast, and thanks for giving me some of your time tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure to be here. I'm always willing to talk, and we in the podcast world got to support each other. So at some point, you'll have to come and co-host an episode of One on One with Mitch Lafon, and we'll talk rock.
I would absolutely love to do that. Speaking of your show, you've got a Facebook page, One on One with Mitch Lafon. There's a YouTube channel, all that. Where did you're a rock journalist, and I'm going to guess that you started out in the rock journalism world going all the way back to 1980 with your interview with Gene Simmons of KISS. Would that be a correct assumption on my part?
That would be a very correct assumption. You know, in 1980, I was 11 years old, and Peter Criss left KISS, and the whole KISS camp was sort of in disarray, and I made a phone call to O'Coin Management, and in my little 11-year-old voice, I said, hey, could I have an interview with KISS? And they said, yeah, absolutely. We'll have Paul Stanley for you, yada, yada, yada. And I lived in Montreal at the time, and I went to my mom, and I said, listen, I got an interview with Paul Stanley at O'Coin Management in Manhattan. Do you mind driving me out? And to my astonishment, she said, yes, sure, no problem. And I went, oh, that was pretty easy. Well, that was a good afternoon. And we got to O'Coin Management and stuff, and they said, oh, you know, we're so sorry Paul couldn't be here. Would you mind speaking to Gene Simmons? And I was like, yes, of course I would mind. How dare. No, I said, yeah, I'm in. And, you know, they think because I had a sort of a girly voice at 11, I think they were expecting that my mom would do the interview. So I said to my mom, listen, would you mind doing this? I wrote her the questions, and she went in and did the first 20 minutes with Gene, and then she says to him, and I think you can hear it on the tape, which you can find on YouTube, she says, would you mind talking to my son? And he did. He said, why not? And absolutely gracious. And after that, he enrolled me in the KISS Army for free, and he sent me this magical letter that let me go backstage for many years, up until 1996, in fact. Absolutely wonderful time. And after that, years and years later, I was asked to put together an Ace Frehley tribute album called Return of the Comet. I got all the artists on that. And in the studio out in California, we were like, oh, hey, you interviewed Gene. And from that, I got to go more interviews. And from then on, it just started, you know, the mission creeps that started coming in where, well, and now I've interviewed LA Guns, and now I've interviewed this guy and that guy and this guy. And that's how it all started. And you know, here we are, 2014, and still going strong, and the names keep getting bigger, and I keep getting return customers. I mean, my Rob Halford interview of this year was, I think, my 6th or 7th with Rob Halford. So,
when you were 11 years old, was it in your mind, I want to be a rock journalist, or did it just, you got into it and then said, hey, this is pretty cool, and it just kind of fell into place as it has here? Is that pretty much how it went?
It fell into place. It was never my intention. You know, I went to McGill University. I did a master's in childhood psychology. I was not intention to do this at all. And I kept writing to Brave Words magazine at the time saying, hey, this album's coming out. Because I had become friends with these different rock stars before doing the interviews. And at one point, the owner wrote me and said, your rumors are 100% true. How do you do it? And you know, I have my connections. And he said, would you like to write with us or for us? And it started there. So no, I never had an intention. My intention has always just been to be an incredibly loyal, big rock fan. And that's what I am, and that's what I do. And doing the rock stuff is just an added bonus.
Now I've got to ask, so how did you manage to get all the rumors 100% correct?
Well, in 96, 97, there was a couple of things. Metal Edge magazine would as far back as 92, 93, would print email addresses of rock stars. And turns out it was the real email addresses of rock stars. I mean, it was Charlie Benente of Anthrax answering. It was Tom Hamilton of Aerosmith answering. Nikki Sixx and Tommy Lee. And so when people didn't have, email wasn't as prevalent as it is today, people would write me back and they'd say, hey, we have a new album coming out. And I don't think anybody understood the power of the internet so much in 94, 95, 96, whereas one guy would say, yeah, we've got this great album coming. Hey, the Generation Swine tour. And there was no, hey, it's off the record. And so I just gathered information basically thanks to email.
That is wild. Of all the stuff, these stories that you broke ahead of time back then, which one, if you remember, would you think would have been the biggest at the time?
It's tough to say. There was a lot of chatter about the KISS reunion tour going on at that time, and I had heard some things, but none of them were earth-shattering. Mostly it was like, hey, LA Guns is recording a new album. It'll be called. It was that kind of stuff.
Okay.
It wasn't like, hey, Iron Maiden's reuniting. It wasn't that kind of news, but it was just like, hey, how did you know that they had a new album coming out and it was going to be called this? Because remember, the news back then traveled a lot slower. Brave Words was a magazine back then. Brave Words was not a website. And there was a 4-month lead-in to stuff. So, you had to have the news to them in April if you wanted to print it for September. And I would always have it up front and fresh, and they would be able to go to press with stuff that nobody else had at the time. It was a good way to build a reputation and a good way to get into this business stuff.
I remember back when I was a kid, way back in the 70s and 80s, without the internet and all that, you would just hear, and it wasn't even email, it was just rumors. Okay, Aerosmith has a new album coming out, and you would wait and wait and wait. Maybe you'd see something in Circus Magazine, or I don't know if you remember Rock Scene Magazine or any of the old.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so that's where we would get our information, but there was no internet where you could just type in a Google search, new album, Aerosmith, whatever. So,
no.
Yeah, and to take advantage of the email like that back when it was still in its infancy, that's really a shrewd move on your part.
And what I did at the time is with that Metal Edge email list, I emailed everybody that was on there. I went systematically through every email, and listen, I at the time was not a big Zakk Wylde fan, and Zakk answered all day long, every day. He said, hey, we have a special, Zakk Wylde group on AOL, if you remember those news groups. And, we became friendly because of that, and I became a Zakk Wylde fan because of that. So, now everybody's sort of hidden behind all kinds of different stuff, and you have a Facebook page with webmasters and different world, but I think there was a great innocence in the early 90s. But in terms of rumors, like you said, in the 70s and 80s, do you know how you knew when a concert came to town? When the newspaper had an ad that said, hey, there's a concert coming to town. Otherwise, you didn't know.
Exactly, or you would hear it on your rock radio station.
Right. You had no idea there was a tour. There was no KISS tour. There was like, oh, KISS plays Montreal. Okay, great.
Yeah, they had a thing on, I grew up in Toledo, Ohio, and they had the rock station there, WIOT, had, I think it was called Concert Connection. They ran it every day at 5:20, and we would listen religiously every day to wait for the big name to pop up. And all of a sudden it would be, KISS at the Sports Arena, December 16th, 1979, a show that I was at because I remember it because it was Peter Criss's last show before the reunion. But that's how we found out about stuff back then. And it's just, it was really just, I don't think that music fans today have any idea just how different the whole atmosphere and everything was about bands and all that back when I was young. It's just cool that you kind of like bridge the gap between when we just had no idea to where you were able to contact these guys to now where it's, I think it would be impossible to get to reach anybody via email these days without going through all the right channels and stuff.
No, you can't. And what's amazing is that a lot of those metal edge email addresses from back in the day are still the ones I use to communicate with people. So
really?
There you go. Yeah.
Wow.
A lot of people haven't changed it. Now, of course, now that we've said that out loud, everybody's going to run back and go to eBay and try to buy an old metal edge edition of something. But yeah,
I think you're overestimating my audience, but that would be great if that happened. One of the things I wanted to bring up, because I know we're both big KISS fans. That's how I discovered you, so to speak, is through the old podcast you used to do about KISS.
Yes.
Gene Simmons, a while back, said that rock music is dead.
Yes.
I thought that while he may have been overstating the case a little bit, I thought he made some legitimate points. I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
I don't think rock music is dead. And every genre has been described as dead. Disco's dead, jazz is dead, classical music is dead. It will always be there, but in a different, configuration. Disco became dance music. Jazz now is what they do at festivals in the summer. Classical is, it's all the popular music changes. Rock music will never die. It just won't die. Now, what has died is perhaps KISS's interest in making new and valid rock music. Who knows? But for the rest of us, it's alive and well.
Like I said, I thought he overstated it. I think the music is absolutely alive and well, but it would be very tough today I believe, for a band to come along like say KISS did, or Aerosmith, or some of the other bands that just cut their teeth on the road and were given 3 or 4 albums to establish an audience and all that. So from that aspect, I think he was right.
Well, maybe the business model's dead, but I don't think the actual urge of fans to listen to it or bands to make the music is dead. And you know what? I'm going to be a little more what's the word I'm looking for? Not negative towards Gene, but I think it was brilliant for him to say that, because in every interview I've seen, from Swedish magazines to German to Brazilian to American to Canadian, somebody's asking Scott Ian of Anthrax about Gene. Somebody's asking Slash about the Gene coming. You're asking me about the Gene coming. And Gene's name keeps popping up and up. I'm not even sure if Gene believes that, but as a smart marketer, he put it out there, and every interview now has a section that says, hey, Scott Ian has a new book. Oh, by the way, Gene Simmons of KISS. It's in every interview. And he didn't have to do an interview. Yeah, he's always been great at getting his name out there and doing all that. I mean, there's no question about it. I don't think the music is dead, but this is what I wanted to follow up with, that is, from my vantage point, and now granted, I don't go out of my way to follow new music, but I don't know where to find the new great rock band. Are they still out there? And if they are, who are they? Yeah, they're still out there. I think one of the things is, well, listen, it's hard. It's a little easier for me because as a rock reporter, a lot of the new music is sent to me. Right. I can say, hey, can you check out this band and maybe do an interview? So I don't have to go find it as much. But just yesterday, I was on YouTube, and there's a label out of Italy called Frontiers, and they do a lot of melodic hard rock, a lot of the stuff I like, a lot of music that sounds like Whitesnake, that sounds like Def Leppard, that sounds like KISS, and they have like 400 or 500 videos of all kinds of new bands, old bands. The new release by there's a band called Three Lions, which is really kind of cool. There's other videos. And so that's what you sort of got to find. Ear Music and Frontiers have YouTube channels that have a lot of these melodic bands, and that's one place to check it out. Yeah, I was just curious about, because, like I said, I think I'm in my 50s, and when you get to my age, you're kind of set in your ways, and it's like, I don't want to go out and discover a new Aerosmith when I already have one, type of thing. Right. And I've been in that beat for the last 10 years. And if you've been on my Facebook in the last couple of days, I've been pumping new music and new bands. I just got to a point this summer where I said, wow, I don't want to hear rock and roll all night again. And this is not a shot at KISS. I love KISS. I mean, it's been part of my life since 1975, 76. So I'm not going to say I don't. But I got turned on to a band out of Switzerland called Gothard. They've been around since '92, but for me in Montreal, they might as well have just gotten together yesterday because I had never heard of them. Fantastic band. Band Heat, which I just mentioned, never heard of them. Getting into them. A band called Wet, W.E.W. Wet. Never heard of them. They've got 3 albums, which are fantastic. Just in the last couple of weeks, I've been getting into it. So I'm into this. I need new stuff. I can't. Carmen Appice and Jolynn Turner, who were, of course, with Rod Stewart and Rainbow and all that,
right,
have a new band called Rated X. By the way, stupid name for a band because every time I get Rated X, I get all kinds of porn pop-ups. Like, I just want to see the stupid, But the album's brilliant. So even some of the older guys are making new relevant stuff, which I'm glad for.
It's good to hear that because we need more rock music, I think. I know that it's tough these days, at least where I live in the Midwest here. It's tough because a rock station is either classic rock,
right,
or they just don't play the new bands like they used to. It's so difficult. But you brought up a name that I want to talk about for a minute, and Jolynn Turner with Rainbow. Yeah. I was having a discussion with someone a week or two ago on a message board that I frequent, and he brought up that he thinks that Rainbow is an underrated band, which I don't know if they're overrated, underrated, properly rated, but I thought, and I want to get your take on this, that one of the things that may have hurt Rainbow, because I thought they did a lot of great music, was that because of it was Ronnie James Dio and Jolynn Turner, and I don't know who's saying on Since You've Been Gone and all that, but was that
Graham Bonnet, wasn't it?
It might. That sounds right, but. What I thought hurt them was that they never were able to develop a consistent vocal sound, and a less educated listener would hear Stone Cold and say Man on the Silver Mountain and not even realize that the same band had done it. Right. And I was just, do you think that's a fair assessment of why they weren't bigger? Because I thought they did great stuff, but they just never seemed to be able to break through to that next level.
Well, there's a couple of things with Rainbow. First of all, they were seen more as a European band, and there was a sort of a different consciousness in terms of European and American, especially back in the 70s and 80s. But I think also vocally, you're very right. Having those different styles, people fell in love with Steven Tyler. People fell in love with Robin Zander. People fell in love with the singer of a band. And when you're changing your singer too often, especially in those days and age where you didn't have the internet to warn you, you'd go get a new album and you go, well, what's this guy? Who's this guy on this album? This is not what I had in my record collection. You would get annoyed. And so, yeah, I think the fact that, and the musical styles also change. What they were doing with Ronnie, you call it what you want, heavy metal-ish or blues-based or whatever you want to call it, it wasn't what they were doing with Jolynn and later on, where it became sort of more pop, rock, melodic, right? It really was musically different and vocally different. And great band, a lot of great songs, but it should have been 3 different band names or 4 or whatever,
You're right, though. Back in the day like that, where we had no warning, you could in those days you could run in guitarists in and out. It really didn't matter that much. But the singer changes, and it changed the whole dynamic of the band, and it threw things off.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, listen, I'm just talking my own experience about picking up records. We didn't have MTV in Canada, so this whole Kiss Unmasking stuff I never saw until years later when Kiss put it on their Kissology stuff. I remember going to the record store and flipping through the bins in the Kiss section, because that's how you figured out when there was a new album.
Right.
And I saw Lick It Up, and I went, oh, my God, they took the makeup off. And I remember that clearly. I was at a mall called Fairview in Pointe-Claire, Quebec, in a record store called Discus, and that's how I discovered that Kiss had taken off the makeup. And that wouldn't happen today. If Kiss took off the makeup tonight and decided to go on tour tomorrow without makeup, we would know in our email box, on our Facebook page, immediately. And by the time they did Lick It Up, printed up the album sleeves, and got it to that record store, it must have been 9 months, 10 months. That's how news travels back then. So when you go pick up, like you say, a Rainbow record, and it's not the guy that you think it's supposed to be, you go, well, son of a gun.
Yeah,
what the hell happened here?
I think, too, that back then we put a lot more, I guess, stock, for lack of a better term, and the original lineup of a band. I mean, they became, that was important to us as listeners back then.
Well, there was a loyalty. There was
Exactly.
There was a band loyalty that just doesn't exist anymore today, or not as much. Back then, you were a Rush fan. You were a KISS fan. You weren't, I love all kinds of bands. The Rush fan would beat up the KISS fan who would who would beat up the Casey and the Sunshine Band fan, right?
You could not, back in the day, if you were a Rush fan or a KISS fan, which I happen to be both, you could not admit to anyone that you might like a song by Casey and the Sunshine Band, because that would get you ostracized from your group.
Yes, absolutely.
You could not do
Absolutely.
it. Now, I think that Casey and the Sunshine Band did some really cool stuff. I thought it back then, but I would never dare say it to anyone, because you just couldn't do that. You were on one side of the battle or the other. You were either a disco fan or a rock fan, and you could not be both like you can today.
And you couldn't have it in your record collection because your friends might come over someday and flip through it.
Right.
Now, however, you can go to YouTube and you can have an entire cornucopia of Casey and the Sunshine Band videos that you can watch secretly and nobody's ever going to find out.
Exactly. I want to talk about some of the interviews that you've done.
Absolutely.
Since I feel like I talk about KISS more on the show than I do anything else, but I do want to get into that a little bit. You've had Ace Frehley on.
Yes, I've spoken to Ace twice in my life.
Okay.
3 times in my life in terms of interviews.
And you've interviewed Gene way back in the day. You did Bruce Kulick.
Yep.
Where is the truth in all the KISS stuff? Does it fall somewhere in the middle? Have you been able to discern? I've
also interviewed Peter.
Okay.
And I met Mark St. John, and I interviewed Tommy, and I interviewed Eric Singer multiple times.
Okay, so where, and the entirety of all the noise, I guess is the way I'll call it, of the whole thing with this, is there any truth in there, and does it lie somewhere in the middle? I mean, is it Ace is entirely right? What's the story with all of this?
Listen, all I can do is offer conjecture and opinion. There's a lot of stuff that we don't know, and I don't think we'll ever know. KISS is an entertainment business that has a facade and has a brand to protect. Much like Walmart, you want to go get a $3 T-shirt at Walmart. You don't want to hear about the guy in Bangladesh that is getting paid a dime a day to do it. And so there's a lot of that with KISS. There's a lot of stuff behind the scenes that we're never going to know. The truth between Ace and KISS. The truth appears to be that Gene and Paul are very determined folks that have a goal in mind and do whatever it takes to get to that goal. And there's no friends in business. And Ace seems to be a guy that liked to party, probably could have continued in the business. He just would have done it at a different rhythm and rate that Gene and Paul were comfortable with, and so he had to go. Same with Peter, and same with Bruce, apparently, since he's not in the band either.
Where do you stand on all that? I mean, this is the most divisive issue, I think, in the KISS Army, as far as Eric and Tommy wearing the old makeup. I want to throw this theory past you that I heard it somewhere else too, but I swear to God I thought of it before I heard it somewhere. Had they not come up with a new... it was in Paul's book is where I read it. Had they not come up with a new character for Eric Carr and just put him in Peter's makeup back then, do you think it would be a big deal today? And like it is now with Eric taking it over in, what was it, in 2000 or whatever it was when Peter left?
I think that we had different expectations. I think when KISS did the reunion tour, they brought back the 4 iconic figures and makeup, and it would have seemed somewhat disingenuous to, in 2004, have the Frogman and the Beetle, and I don't think. I think it was a different time. In the 80s, I thought that, and I'm assuming that KISS thought that they were so big and so huge, and they could do whatever they want, that they could slap whatever makeup on, and the magic would still work. And I don't think they understood that, a Coke bottle with a green label is no longer a Coke bottle. And so I think they sort of went, years later they went, yeah, we can't make that mistake again. Had they put Eric Carr in Peter's makeup, I think it would have caused an incredible revolt among the KISS fan base back then, because like we were talking about, there was a loyalty, and there was a loyalty to your band, and there was a loyalty to your band member. You loved Jimmy Page. You loved Robert Plant. You loved Peter Criss. And I think had they put Eric Carr in Peter Criss's makeup, people wouldn't have understood brand. They would have said, "What are you doing?"
Yeah, this is true. I'm not sure. I mean, it's easy to look at it with hindsight now and see how everything has played out. But I think what I'm asking basically is that had they done it back then, the impact of putting Eric in it today would not have been what it is, I guess is the point I'm trying to make. And it is what it is, you know.
But Eric today, I mean, listen, you can't fault the. I don't think you can fault the band. I don't. Yeah. When you go to CNN or Fox News or any of those, and they talk about KISS, they throw up those 4 makeup designs. Sometimes it's Ace. Sometimes they don't even do the research. They just throw up the makeup designs, and so you can't blame the band for promoting those designs. And as far as Eric goes, listen, if it wasn't Eric, it would be Frankie Bonelli or Alec Van Halen. Somebody would have said, "Hey, you want to make a few extra bucks? Throw on this outfit," and somebody would have said yes.
Absolutely, I agree.
And same goes for Tommy Thayer. And should Tommy Thayer quit and did some other guy come in, they'll put him in the spaceman makeup and they'll say, "Listen, here's your options. You get paid a lot of money, get to meet a lot of folks, and you get to put on this makeup, or you can go home." And me would say, free plane rides from fans. Yeah, man, thanks.
Yeah, I would throw on the Ace makeup tomorrow if they asked me to. No problem. The only thing I would say is I would change Tommy's outfit because I just don't like it. It's not as good as all the other ones, but that's just, that's a minor nitpick, and I'm sure I could get past that.
That's one thing that I'm surprised is that they haven't picked either the concept of we change our outfits every tour like we did in the past, or Love Gun was the thing. That's what the reunion tour looked like. Listen, dress like those guys on those 2 tours, period, end of story. Thank you very much. I'm surprised they sort of do this in-betweenish kind of thing where we sort of changed. Like this year on Eric's outfit, they added a little chikara, that little Japanese symbol. It's like, well, that's not really a uniform change.
Yeah.
Really?
And the thing, I guess my thing, too, would be that if you're going to give Tommy a new outfit like that, it's so clearly derivative of Ace's Destroyer costume. Mm-hmm. I mean, why not either just go with that, which I think is a far better look, or go with something completely different. But this is just it's kind of half pregnant in my book, but that's just me.
Yeah. Listen, I liked what they did in 2004, 2003, 2004 with those leather outfits and stuff.
Yes.
Which was a new outfit, but sort of steeped in the tradition of KISS. Why not just do that? I mean, we don't need flamingos and stuff like they did on Dynasty, but
they were based off the old Alive outfits, right? The 2002 era stuff.
Yeah, but with a little bit of a tweak.
Yeah, they were great.
Gave each guy their own personality. Let's go with that again. But hey,
Yeah, but again, though, like I said, I talk about KISS so much on this show. I don't want to go too far in that direction.
I'll talk KISS any day of the week.
Well, then I got to ask you, what's your favorite album?
I'm going to have to say the first one for the simple reason that if you look at the songs on the first Kiss album, Deuce, Strutter, Cold Gin,
100,000 Years.
Those are the ones that 40 years later still make it into the set list consistently. If they're not in the set list, those are the ones where fans go, "Hey, why is Deuce not in there tonight?" You don't hear, "Hey, why is Read My Body not in the set list tonight?" Have they made better sounding albums, sonically more adept since then? Yeah, absolutely. But you take Kiss out of the mix, and you've lost the cornerstone. You've lost the foundation of the House of Kiss. So I'm going to have to say Kiss. Listen, I love Creatures of the Night. I love Revenge. I think Love Gun is great. And I might even argue that Creatures of the Night is better than Kiss. But if you take Kiss out of the mix, none of anything else that came after matters. So Kiss is the one.
Like you said, it's the foundation. I mean, almost literally the foundation of every concert they've done since that album came out.
Yes.
For all intents and purposes.
For 40 years, every concert has had 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 of those songs, and you cannot say that about Creatures of the Night. You cannot say that about Revenge. You cannot say that about Crazy Nights. Can't say that about Lick It Up. That first one is the one. Maybe you could say that about Destroyer because they play a lot of Destroyer. But that first one, man, people want to hear Strutter. People want to hear Deuce.
Oh, I know. When I saw them, my first time I saw them in '79 on the Dynasties tour, I was so disappointed that I want to say the only song they did from the first album was Black Diamond, if I remember right. I wanted to hear Strutter. I was dying to hear 100,000 Years, and what I got was Radioactive, and I got
Tossing and Turning. I got Tossing and Turning.
Oh, see, they didn't do that when I saw them because I've watched videos since then on YouTube, and they did not play Tossing and Turning, thank goodness. But yeah, and they open with King of the Nighttime World, which is a great song, but I don't think it's a good show opener. And It was just a really because I had been dying. I mean, I've been a KISS fan. My favorite album, probably because it's the first one I discovered by them, is Dressed to Kill. Yeah. And I'd been dying to see them since that album came out. I finally got my chance on the Dynasty tour, and I was just like, this isn't the KISS I signed up for. This is, they had the crazy outfits with all the colors and stuff. I wanted the Alive, Love Gun era KISS, and what I got was Dynasty. But I did get to rectify that. I saw them on Psycho Circus and the Farewell Tour, so it all worked out in the end.
And Dynasty was my first tour, August 6, 1979, Montreal Forum, and it was my first concert ever. And, we had been in Europe just before. We flew back to Montreal so we could make it in time for the show. And I just remember the sound and the smoke, and they came rising out of the floor. That's not how I knew music. Just keep in mind, in 79, we didn't have MTV or Much Music or any sort of visual representation. All we had was that black disc, the vinyl. And so to hear the sound and the smell and the screaming of the fans and the smell in the air, because in 79 there was cigarettes and pot and all kinds of nonsense. Just all of that blended together made an audio, visual, auditory, experience that, it was fantastic. So I had no complaints.
I should say, too, that, now don't get me wrong, I loved the show. It was still KISS. It was still the guys I'd been dying to see, but I was a little disappointed in the set list. But the show itself, I mean, the way they came up behind the amps like that was just as cool as hell. Yeah. They had the big, giant mirror ball that was spinning around. It was awesome, a visual spectacular, but the set list just kind of threw me a little bit. But, at that point, though, I'm 18, 19, 20 years old. I kind of moved on past... I was into Zeppelin at the time and Aerosmith and Rush and all that stuff. So it was still awesome. I still loved it.
And we had a little bit of an age difference. Back then, August 6th, 1979? So I would have been, I'm born in August, so I would have been 10 waiting to be 11. So, no, wait, I was 9 waiting to be 10, I guess, right?
Well, yeah, I've got you by about 10 years. I was 18 waiting to be 19, so...
Yeah, so it was a bit different. To me, it was like being at Disneyland and the colors worked.
It looked fantastic. I never liked Gene's outfit, but I don't want to go down that rabbit hole either. But so over the years,
I loved Ace's outfit. That was the best one.
Yeah, it was cool. I did like that one. And I'll tell you one thing, and I swear, listeners, I'll get off the KISS train. I promise. I just have to bring this up. It was the last night of the tour, and what I thought was really cool is at the end of the show, they brought out just bags and bags filled with like these styrofoam KISS Army things and guitar picks, and just emptied it out in front of the whole place. That was pretty cool, yeah.
Oh, we didn't get that.
Yeah, and then I found out, a few months later that it turned out that by no planning of my own, I had been at the last show Peter Criss would play with them for what would be, 17 or however many odd years it was. I had no idea at the time, but yeah.
Yeah, 16 years, yeah.
Yeah, but, and then when they did the, okay, this is the last thing, and then I promise I'll move on. When they did the Unplugged thing and the 4 original guys got back together, that to me was like cooler than seeing the Beatles reunite, I thought.
Again, being in Canada, we didn't get to see it live on MTV or whatever it was on, VH1 or whatever it was on. We had to wait until it became available as a DVD or a CD. So I missed the excitement, which really annoyed the living daylights out of me.
I discovered it completely by accident. I was flipping through the channels, and they were probably at about Plaster Caster in the Unplugged show.
Wow.
And I thought, well, cool, I'll keep watching. And again, we talked earlier in the show about how the news just didn't travel back then. I had no idea that they were going to reunite with the original 4 guys that night. So when that happened, it was completely... and totally by surprise for me. And I thought, this is I'm witnessing history here. It was really cool.
Yeah, it's amazing how the rock world or the world has changed in like what, less than 20 years, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was not shortly thereafter, then I finally got my first email address at work and all that. But before that, it was just something that took me completely by surprise. And I kind of miss that nowadays. Yep. You can't be surprised anymore. You can't be pleasantly shocked or disappointed because you know it almost immediately when it happens, thanks to Twitter and everything now. There's no way to get anything past the audience anymore.
No, there really isn't. And it's funny because in that same vein, when the internet and email started getting popular, the one thing that people would do that annoyed me, they would send out the set list. Hey, I saw KISS in Chicago last night. Here's the set list. And when you would go to the show, you'd go, oh, yeah, check, play that. And now I've come so much on the other side, I go looking for the set list so I can think, okay, this song I can go buy a hot dog. This one I can pee.
Exactly.
Okay, this one I can beat traffic for because I got to get home for the kids. And I like the fact that you can go to Setlist FM or whatever it's called, setlist.com or whatever it is, and get it, and you can just follow along and go, perfect. Pee break, good.
When I saw Rush on the, the Time Machine tour, I did exactly that. I knew the set list ahead of time. I thought, okay, I've seen him play Tom Sawyer a gazillion times, so I'm like, okay, that's where I'm going to go get food. All right. I've seen him play 2112 a million times, so that's going to be the encore. I thought I'll leave. I forget what the last song was. I'm like, I'll leave at that point because I have to beat traffic and get home because it was on a Tuesday night, and I had to get home and get to work. And so, yeah, there's that benefit to it, but it was also kind of a drag because I knew they were going to open with Spirit of Radio. I knew it was, so there was. It's got an up and a downside, I suppose.
Yeah, a great song, by the way, Spirit of the Radio.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Rush, have you ever interviewed any of the guys from Rush?
No. In fact, one of the roadies is a friend of mine, and I've had a chance to go to the shows and be on the guest list and all that, but I cannot get a Rush guy to talk to me. And you know what? Not many people can, apparently. They sort of do Canadian, CBC, our national broadcaster interviews here and there, but they don't really seem to talk to anybody.
I know that Neil Peart is on George. I can't pronounce his last name, but
yeah, neither can I. It's like 28 letters and mostly vowels. It's Strombolopoulos or something.
Right,
like that.
but Neil Peart is on that show. I think he was on last night,
but that's the big show up here.
Yeah. But Neil doesn't talk to anyone really ever, so that was a big deal. But yeah, so you've interviewed all these guys,
but neither does Getty or Alec.
Not really.
Alex.
They do like the press junket thing where they do the quick hits here and there, but
yeah,
they're not an easy band to get. So I can understand why you'd have the problems. But speaking of your interviews, anything stand out like where you go, this is the one I'm always going to remember as my favorite, or as the worst, or anything like that?
I do have a couple of worsts in there, but. There's a few that I really look back fondly upon. About 2004 or 2005, I got a call from Steve Perry, the former Journey.
Right, yeah, exactly.
singer.
Yeah.
Steve was talking to nobody. How I got it, how this came about, I have no idea. And I remember being told specifically, you'll get 10 minutes if you're lucky. And I went, okay. And we got to 76 minutes. Now, back then, to record, there was no digital recording. I had to actually have a physical mini disc player that had a mini disc, and it had a finite amount of time, which happened to be 76 minutes. And Steve kept talking, and we hit it off really well. And I said, Steve, I've got to stop. I can't record. My player ran out, and I didn't have a backup disc. I mean, I was told 10 minutes. I had 76. I didn't think I needed a backup disc. And that was just very special and very unique. And when I put the interview out and I typed out all 76 minutes, I mean, it was a thesis by the time I typed it out. And I found a site, melodicrock.com, with Andrew McNeese, who was willing to put out the whole thing. I said, listen, it's the whole thing or nothing. I'm not doing this editing. And it became sort of internet lore for Steve Perry Journey fans and melodic rock fans, because here was this guy who had not spoken since 95, 96, basically, doing not only an interview, but talking about how the death of his parents affected him and why he doesn't want to perform. That one's a real good one. And if you can look up, Mitch Lafon, Steve Perry interview, I would suggest reading it because it was really a good piece of I don't know, literature, I guess, for the lack of a better word.
Yeah, because I can't think of a time where I've seen him interviewed by anybody over the years.
And I could have got. We could have literally had I not, had this been on Skype where we could record it, we could have gone on for probably 3-4 hours. It was just going that well. Other great interviews are Rob Halford of Judas Priest. I have no idea if Rob Halford knows who I am, whether he likes me or doesn't like me. All I know is when you sit down in a room with him, you feel like you are king of Halford land. He just makes you feel so comfortable, so welcomed, so sincere, so polite. He is just, I'm just going to go beyond a great rock star. He's just a great human being to be in presence with or on the phone with. He is just incredibly nice, incredibly... he's just wonderful. I mean, you go, well, I don't have anything to ask him, and he will turn it into a half-hour interview.
You think of Rob Halford, Judas Priest, Metal God and all that. That's not, I mean, not to say that you think he'd be a bad guy, but you don't think of him in terms of like he's going to be this really super nice, accommodating guy. You think, and that's cool. You
would think, hey, he's done a million of these before. Get him in, get him out. Let's move along. But he's not like that. He's, hey, Mitch, hey. And he always knows your first name. I don't know if it's because Mitch is an easy first name, but I'm sure if he spoke to you, he'd say, hey, Greg, or hey. He makes the effort to know your name, to refer to you by your name. I did an interview once at a hotel with him, and they had it set up in his room, and you walk in, he's like, do you need a water? Do you need a this? Do you need to go to use the bathroom? Like it's mind blowing. It's not like, hey, sit down, shut up, let's go. I got 15 minutes, get you out of here. He doesn't do that, and it's great. Alice Cooper is great too. Alice will talk to you about anything, will answer any questions. Alice, on the other hand, does have a hard 15 rule. You've got 15 minutes, and you better sprint to that finish line, because once you get there, it's interview over. But you know what? They tell you up front. You know it. There's no shenanigans. And it's great because they'll book, 15 interviews in a day, and you don't end up waiting. Because sometimes when you do interviews, you'll have a 1 o'clock interview, and at 1:15, 1:30, going, oh, yeah, he's running late because... And it's like... I got stuff to do too, folks, You don't get that with Alice. Alice, he says, I'm phoning at 1, and I'm getting off at 1:15. Get ready. And I've always enjoyed, I think speaking to Alice is fantastic. It's just an absolute pleasure. And I remember one time I was telling him the story that my son's name is Ryan Cooper. And back in the day, Ryan Roxy was in the band. He's back in the band, but this was before he left. Ryan Roxy was in the band, and Ryan was a very nice guy. And I said, okay, call my son Ryan Cooper, because he was born at 4 a.m. We had been up 37 hours. I didn't have names in my head. I just said Ryan Cooper to the nurse. And I told Alice this during an interview or during an interview period. I think it might have been off the record. And he said, really, I need to meet him. And we took him out. And we had VIP passes. He took us onto the bus. And Alice didn't speak to me on the bus. He spoke to my kid and my son and my daughter for a good 45 minutes, talking about movies, talking about what they like to do. Do they like to color? Because they were a bit younger at the time. Do they like to color, not color? Do they like Gatorade, no Gatorade? I've never seen anybody do that.
That is really cool. Alice Cooper's one of my all-time favorites.
Yes.
That's just awesome to hear that about him.
And why would you do that? Because I told you my son was named. I mean, literally, they're named after Ryan Roxy and Alice Cooper. But he could just go, yeah, that's great. I've heard it 1,000 times. Leave me alone. and he didn't do that. Incredible person.
That is, yeah, that's just cool because you just don't expect that. Because you hear so many stories, and I don't know how much of it's true or not, but that a lot of people can be jerks, the celebrities are jerks and all that, but to hear, like, especially guys like Rob Halford and Alice Cooper, who, I mean, Alice, obviously, with, the stage act and all that, but then again, I'm not that surprised because he's always seemed like he's a very nice guy when you see him in interviews and stuff. Rob Halford throws me a little bit. I mean, I think it's great, but I'm a little surprised.
Rob's great. Absolutely great. There's a few out there. I'm trying to think. I've interviewed David Coverdale a couple of times. He's always done the same thing. Knows your name. Always addresses you by your name.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
See, I've not heard a lot of good things about David Coverdale. I've got to be honest.
Well, I've not heard a lot of good things about David Coverdale, and I think there are two things to remember. And I'm going to give myself a little pat on the back. I think it's how you approach them. If you approach them sort of with in your face questions, and I'm going to get this out of you, and I'm going to suck all the blood out of you, and you're going to answer what. I think the way I speak to them, you sort of got to give respect to get respect, kind of thing. And I'm not saying that other people haven't been respectful. Maybe David's had a bad day or two. But I just know that when I've spoken to David, when I've spoken to Alice, they've always been very, very kind. And, no complaints. Boy, who else out there has been... Gene, that first time I interviewed him, was obviously very gracious. I'm forgetting a ton of names.
Here's a name I want to throw at you, just because I found it was interesting, because not a lot of people, I think, these days remember these guys all that well, is Mick Box from Uriah Heep.
Yeah.
When I was young, Uriah Heep was a pretty big band, and for some reason, I don't know what the reasoning is, certain bands made the transition into the classic rock format, and others just seem to be left behind. And I feel like Uriah Heep is one of those bands that you still hear stealing on the radio, but that's about it.
Right. Yeah.
And they had, they had Easy Livin'. They had, I think it was called Sleet Lorraine. They had a lot of songs, but The Wizard, a lot of stuff that got played back then that just didn't seem to carry over. And but I just thought it was interesting that you talked to him, to Mick Box, and I wondered what inspired you to track down Mick Box and talk to him, I guess, is the question I'm trying to ask you.
Well, in fact, they tracked me down and asked me if I would speak to Mick. So,
okay.
Of course, I said, yeah, sure. Listen, when you've done 20 years of interviews and you get placed in all kinds of magazines and websites and stuff, people come to you and say, hey, would you mind? And Mick was one of those where he had some new product, and the publicist said, hey, Mitch, would you mind? And I said, no. It's Mick Box.
Yeah,
right.
Sure.
I'm in. And so he was pitched to me, actually, and I think it turned out great. And in terms of why haven't they made the crossover to classic rock? Well, I think in Uriah Heep's case, and in a lot of those cases, is, Uriah Heep was sort of on the fringe where they weren't, whatever you want to call it, progressive metal. They weren't in that sort of radio singles kind of club.
Right.
They had a lot of good, and also I think they haven't done a lot of touring in the States and in Canada recently, and a lot of sort of those heritage acts that go out year after year, your Def Leppards, your Kisses, your Aerosmith, what they will do is every summer, basically from June to September, they will play all the sheds in the States and all the arenas and the smaller and the barbecue rib, the rib fests, and they will keep going and keep that name, and sort of by default they go, oh yeah, I saw Def Leppard at the Syracuse or the New York State Fair last year. Oh,
right,
hey, look at that. And so they sort of become part of the fabric of what summer is, and they whereas Uriah Heep and Status Quo and those a lot of those European bands that it's just too costly to come over and do that, they sort of just get forgotten.
Yeah, like I said, I don't think that Uriah Heep is a band that had a ton of hits that was super huge in the 70s, but I do think that there's a little more to them than just the song "Stealin'," I guess is my point. You brought up a name I was listening to one of your shows earlier today. You brought up Status Quo.
Right.
A band that I'm not terribly familiar with, but I heard you talking about them and that they do very well everywhere but here.
Yeah, they do.
What's the reasoning for that? Why are some bands so big in Europe or even in Canada for that matter that just don't seem to catch on over here? Any theories on that?
Well, there's a few. Back in the day, and I've had this discussion with many musicians, from Larry Gowan, who's in Styx now, to other people. You were for some artists, you were considered a local talent, and the record companies groomed you as a local talent. You look at Larry Gowan, he was Gowan in Canada, was all over Much Music, had a bunch of top 10 singles, had greatest hits packages, platinum albums, couldn't have gotten arrested in Chicago in the 80s, you know? And same thing with Europe. You know, you go to Japan, nobody knew of Gowan because, and I forget, I think it was maybe Universal Canada or maybe Warner Canada, whatever his record company was, it wasn't the world company, it was the Canada branch. They said, you know what? We love Gowan. He's very talented, and he's going to be a local Canadian artist, and that's how we're going to market him. We're not going to invest in singles because we don't think London's going to understand. We don't think, you know, Miami's going to get it. And so a lot of bands did that. And, you know, Status Quo was one of those where they said, hey, they've got a British sensibility, a UK sensibility that we don't think is going to sell in Des Moines, Iowa. And so they didn't market them here. And so they didn't concentrate. And listen, when I spoke to the members of Status Quo in the interview, they said, listen, we didn't have a U.S. manager. We had a UK manager. We thought that it was enough, but he didn't understand the U.S. market, and so we never broke. And listen, here's a band who's been around since 1968, longer than KISS. In fact, longer than Alice Cooper.
Longer than a lot of bands.
Longer than a lot of bands. Just released four pieces of product this year, an entirely new acoustic album called Status Quo Acoustic Strip Bare, box set live, you know, all kinds of stuff. 120 million albums sold. And yet, wherever you're sitting right now, I bet if you were to poke your neighbor, he would say, who the hell are you talking about?
120 million sold?
120 million albums sold in their career. Now, listen, it's a career that spans almost 50 years.
So?
but you know, listen, they were the first band that stepped on stage for Live Aid. When Live Aid went live on July 13th, 1985 at 7 a.m. on MTV and on Much Music, and Status Quo walked out and played. And on this side of the pond, we went, who are those limeys playing? You know, who are those? But at Wembley Stadium, you know, Princess Diana and Prince Charles stood up and went, yeah. And you went, huh, wow, who the hell are they?
It's just astonishing to me that a band with that kind of sales, I mean, 120 million, I don't care if it took you 100 years, that's really good.
And you know, that's my number one podcast. When you look at all the numbers, you look at Ace Frehley, you look at Rob Halford, the one with Status Quo is tripling anything else. Fans in Europe are just eating up that podcast. They go to iTunes, they go to Spreaker, iHeartRadio, even on my YouTube page, they're just eating it up. And people here couldn't care less.
I've heard of them. I was familiar with the name, but like you said, if you played their greatest hit in Europe to me, I'd have no idea who it was. But
you wouldn't.
Because of your show, though, and now what you just told me, I'm going to go check them out. I want to find out more about them. But it blows my mind that a band that could sell 120 million albums worldwide and they're practically unknown over here. I don't even know how that happens.
Well, listen, you know, there's a guy right now, another current artist called Robbie Williams, who in Europe is huge, probably bigger than the Beatles. I mean, and he's been around for 15 years, if not longer.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the name, actually, yeah.
But he never does anything over here. You know, the last time I was in Europe, which I probably was like 2004 or something like that, there were Robbie Williams all over the place, on the radio, the concert hall. He's coming to Copenhagen. He's doing this. And you fly over here, and at the time I was talking to the EMI guys and the Sony guys and the BMG guys, and I'd say, so when are you going to release the new Robbie? And they go, who the hell's that? And I'm like, well, you're working at the record company. You tell me who the hell is that. and nobody knew. Nobody cared.
I want to say that he had something that was out here in the 80s. But
maybe.
I think there was a bit of an effort made with Robbie Williams back in the 80s, and I don't think it took off. It never went anywhere, but I'm familiar with the name.
No.
I had no idea he was still around. I knew who he was, but that's how I knew him, as a guy that was from the 80s, back when there was the whole kind of flock of seagulls, you know, new, quote-unquote, new rock type of thing going on. He was one of the bands that kind of got lumped in with that, or the artist, I suppose. And that's how I knew of him. But I would have never guessed in a million years that he's still not only around, but still big in Europe. I had no clue.
So big. Now, speaking of big and going back to the status quo, I've known Status Quo. I saw them as far back as Live Aid. I've heard the songs here and there because I'm in the business. I know that Bryan Adams takes pictures of them, and I'm familiar with them. But going back to that interview, I prepped really hard for it, and I had all kinds of great questions and all kinds of great. That interview was so engaging. He was such a great, his partner was in the hospital with heart conditions, and I said, "Oh, how do you feel about him being in the hospital?" And I was expecting, we wish him the best, blah. And he said, "Stupid bastard! If he stopped smoking, he wouldn't have this problem." I went, "Wow, that is really refreshing." And that interview is so engaging. I've actually gone back and listened to it a couple of times, and every time I go, okay, I'm just going to listen to 5 minutes just to, and it just sucks you in because he was such a good subject. He gave good answers, and he gave answers that were real and not off a script. And hey, Status Quo Acoustic Strip Bare is the new album that just came out in October. So, it's 24 of their greatest hits done completely acoustically. Doesn't represent the original versions, but it's a great album. It's a lot of fun, and hey, Bryan Adams took the picture on the cover. So,
like I said, I was familiar with the name. I'd heard of them, but I did not know their music at all. But because of your show and because of this conversation, I'm going to check them out. So you never know. Maybe I will start the wave that will finally get them their much deserved acclaim over here in the United States. Well,
it's people like you and me who say, hey, how can they sell 120 million and nobody knows about them over here? And, we talk about it in the interview. And I said to him up front, you can go to Australia and sell out a stadium. You can go to, or at least an arena, UK, Japan, blah, blah, blah. You come to Montreal, I don't even think I can throw you in my backyard. And he went, yeah, I know. And he talks about it, and you got to give the guy credit. He didn't say, "Listen, you stupid bastard. We could of course play." No, he said, "Yeah, you're right." And he talks about it, and it's just a very and I'll keep repeating the word. It's just a very engaging chat, and good on Status Quo. And so, of course, hopefully your American listeners or whoever Canadian listeners will say, "All right, let me go to YouTube. Let me check out a couple of videos. Let's see what this band's about." It's sort of a And, well, they sort of done every style by now, but it's sort of this straight old, out of a pub, classic rock, rock and roll.
I think, too, that maybe part of my astonishment is just the typical American viewpoint, which I can't say I'm terribly proud of, but how could they be big over there and be happy with that since they're not big over here? Well, of course, if you're huge everywhere else and you're not from here, who cares?
Yeah.
I'm sure they're perfectly content. They're like, oh, yeah, we never made it in America, but look at us everywhere else. And that's a trade-off I would make, I think. It's just the ugly American in me coming out, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, and I've had the same ugly Canadian, this sort of tunnel vision. I was pitched a band this summer called Gothard. And I went, no, I don't care. And I was sitting there this summer, and I got onto Wikipedia, and I said, let me just see what Gothard is. And it says, band has been around since 1992. And I went, all right. And it says, they have 11 straight #1 albums in Europe. And I went, whoa, wait, what? Why don't I know them? And I said, okay, what the hell? I'll do the interview. And they provided some music for me to listen to. And I loved it. I mean, I spent over $1,000 this summer on eBay and Amazon buying every CD, single, Japanese, everything. And I've got the entire collection now. And it's just bloody awesome. And I had never heard of them.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, there's so much great undiscovered music out there, I suppose.
But I mean, they're not really they're just undiscovered to us.
To us, I mean, yeah.
In North America, because 11 #1 albums in Switzerland. Obviously, somebody knows who the heck they are. You and I sitting here with our tunnel vision going, hey, go Packers, put on a KISS song while we watch the game. We miss some of this stuff. And this band, Gothard, is you take Journey and Styx and Def Leppard and KISS and Cheap Trick and Led Zeppelin and Aussie solo stuff from the 80s. You throw it all in the blender, and that's Gothard. You'll have a song that comes out sounding exactly like a Journey tune, followed up by this crunchy sort of, Aussie metal. And you go, oh, well, that's interesting. That this band does everything. And
well, see, there you go. I was talking earlier about how I didn't know where to find new music, and now I've got an idea. I've got two bands I can start working with here.
You listen to One-on-One with Mitch Lafon on iTunes, Spreaker.
There you go.
And we'll bring you some of these new bands, because that to me is part of my mission statement, is to go out and interview bands that I know have a following in Europe and I know have a following in Australia, and I know that they don't have that much of a following here, and hopefully they will, and hopefully go to my Facebook page, my private one, Facebook, Mitch Lafon on Facebook, and I'll accept people. I'm good at that, or I like doing that, I should say. Not that I'm good at it. There's a lot of people that say, "Hey, Mitch, I discovered that band because you posted about it, or you talked about it, or you interviewed them," and I think that's part of the fun part of this job is knowing that you've affected somebody's musical space,
Yeah, that's cool. And like I said, you've influenced me. I'm going to check out Status Quo. I'm going to check out Gothard. I'm going to do the whole bit. But since you're a real pro, man, you segued right into what I want to talk about next. So what can we look forward to on One-on-One with Mitch Lafon? What's coming up? What's coming down the pipe here?
Well, there's a lot of interviews that have been pitched to me. Hopefully, I've been pitched Dennis DeYoung. I've been pitched Slash. I've been trying to get Roger Daltrey of The Who. But for the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be doing sort of a rise on rock on the rise kind of thing, where I'm going to introduce some newer bands, very short segments. Most of my interviews run 30 minutes or 40 minutes. I'm going to do a bunch of 10-minute interviews. Just did one today with a guy named Nigel Bailey with a band called Three Lions. Brand new band that was just put together this year, featuring members of Asia and 10. There's another band, by the way, 10, which I think have been around for 20 or 30 years in Europe. Nobody really knows about them here. I know that Sirius XM's Hair Nation plays one of their songs once in a while, but it's just a great melodic record. A lot of the sites, a lot of the melodic rock websites have given it a 10 on 10. And I'm going to introduce you to Nigel.
Cool.
Nigel Bailey and Three Lines. He's also got a solo album coming out. So I'm going to do a bit of that, because there's a couple of reasons for it. First of all, I think it's important to give back and introduce new bands, but also with the Thanksgiving and Christmas season approaching, a lot of our more established acts just aren't talking at this time of the year because their tour cycle just ended, their album cycle just ended. You don't compete with, the Christina Aguilera Christmas album if you're KISS or if you're Def Leppard. You just go, you know what? We did our summer thing. Now we hibernate. We'll see you in February or March. So I'm going to be doing a few shows that just take advantage of this sort of downtime in the industry. Cool.
And I think Dennis DeYoung would make a very interesting interview, just from my personal opinion.
Oh, absolutely. And boy, this is going to sound kind of cocky, but I think I would definitely get a great interview out of him. I'm going to give myself that pat on the back. I think I could get it where it would be unique.
I don't think it's cocky at all. I think you've got the resume to back it up. I'm running down a list of like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame here, basically on your guest list. So no, it's not cocky at all. It's a great show. I think that people should check it out. Like I said, I was listening to a little bit of the Steve Hackett interview you did a little earlier before we came on tonight, which was dragged me in, and I was like, damn, I got to stop listening to this so I can go interview Mitch. But I'll get back to it when we're done. It's a great show, man, and I'm not going to keep you too much longer. I want to tell you I appreciate your time tonight. Yeah. And
you're a sports guy too, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so
we got to talk hockey for a second before you go.
Well, a little hockey, but what is wrong with my Washington Redskins?
Wow, where do you want me to start? You got another hour?
Well, I listen. As a fan since 1982, and I should tell you how I became a Redskins fan. That's actually a fun story too. I think the problem is Snyder, the owner.
Absolutely.
You get rid of him. Listen, it's top down. When you wonder why Sears is falling apart or JCPenney's falling apart, it usually starts at the top. Poor leadership at the top trickles all the way down. And Schneider has really screwed up that team, and of course all the the free agent signings, and the Desmond Howards and the this and the oh my God, it's just been a mess for too long, and I just don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. A lot of teams that have gone through some transition bumps, whether it's the Giants or the Eagles or the Packers. At some point, you go, yeah, but give it a couple of years. We've got a new crop that's going to. There just isn't that hope with Washington. They're just awful, and RG3 had a couple of good games, and they said, "Yay, he's the savior." With all due respect, he's a very average quarterback who makes a lot of mistakes. Cousins, I thought, was going to walk in there and turn things around. Turns out that he's a good replacement quarterback for a quarter.
Exactly.
He's just not a long-term, I got a game plan quarterback. So I don't know.
We do a part of the podcast. We do a football show. And Zach, my partner on that podcast, we talked up Kirk Cousins like he was the second coming of Joe Montana. I'm not kidding you, for a year. We kept saying, Kirk Cousins is the answer. Why RG3 is not built for this offense? Put Kirk Cousins in. RG3 got hurt. Kirk Cousins came in, and he just lit it up for a couple of games. They were like, see, we were right. Look at us. Look at what the geniuses we are. And boy, do we look silly now. Because you're absolutely right. Kirk Cousins is a guy, great off the bench, can get you a quarter here, a half there, but not a guy you want to pin your hopes on. No,
he going to a baseball analogy, he is that closer who can come in and give you 2 solid innings and win that game for you or make sure you don't lose the game. But he's not the guy who can pitch 9 innings.
No, not at all.
And I was so shocked. I thought when they said RG3 got hurt, and I wasn't like, oh, yeah, RG3 got hurt. I was like, okay, great. This is our chance. We needed a watershed moment where, the owner would say, well, we have no choice. We've got to play Cousins. And it happened. And I don't even remember the stat. It was like something like 18 interceptions in 6 games, or, like ridiculous. And you just went, wow, how could I have been so wrong?
I completely understand the feeling, believe me. But you answered your own question with the Redskins. The problem with the team is that Dan Snyder absolutely is the biggest issue they have. He doesn't seem to understand
football.
That too. But you can't just free agent your way to a championship in the NFL. It's never been done, and it's not going to happen. You've got to build a foundation. We were talking, to bring it back around to rock music. We were talking about the KISS with the first album. Yeah. Dan Snyder needs to come up with the first KISS album for the Redskins and build off of that, and he refuses to do that. He refuses to say we're going to just have to blow it up and start and build, and he won't do that. And that's why there's no light at the end of the tunnel, because it's the same thing over and over and over again, season after season after season. And it's a shame because, they were just a great franchise for a lot of years, and now they're kind of a laughingstock because of him, for the most part.
Well, they are what the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were through the 80s.
Sure.
They've just become that perennial loser. And it's and you know what the funny thing is people always talk about should they change their name, and whether it's politically correct or not, they probably should just change their name for 2 reasons. A, because they're embarrassing the Redskins that came before them in the 70s and 80s. B, because they need a distraction. If they, ran out there and became whatever the Washington Flamingos, they would have new merch, new hats, new banners, new posters, new all kinds of stuff to sell, and it would be like, oh, dude, what? They're playing a game, but look at this, I got a new Washington Pelicans shirt. Look, it would offer a distraction. Forget the political correctness stuff. They should just change the name, because remember when the Washington Bullets of the NBA were really sucking, and there was a thing, well, there's a lot of murders, and you should change. And they became the Washington Wizards. For a couple of years, people didn't care that they sucked. They were like, hey, we got the Wizards. We've changed their name. We got a new logo. Did you buy the new T-shirt? Did you get the new hat? I think the Redskins need to change their names just to give the fans a distraction for a couple of years, just to change the conversation of, wow, they suck, to, hey, did you get a new T-shirt?
Yeah, they do need to change a lot of things. The name, I think they need to change everything from the top right down. Because that's a team that they've won 3 Super Bowls in their history. They've been in 2 others. I mean, you're talking about a franchise that's made 5 Super Bowl appearances that today you would never in a million years bet for them to ever make the Super Bowl again, because they're just so inept. is the best way I can describe it. Yeah, but you answered your own question. It's Dan Snyder, and you're right. It's from the top right on down. That's the problem with the Redskins. But
it is a cavalcade of mediocrity.
Exactly.
It doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon. And it's funny because when we had Joe Theismann, I was a Redskins fan. Thank you. Good night. Party's over. Now I'm a Redskins fan who also happens to like the San Diego Chargers and will always pick that one underdog team that I hope could win the Super Bowl because I just know that my Washington team isn't. So I've now a fan that has to have two other teams as backups just in case.
I completely understand that feeling. I was a Cleveland Browns fan my whole life.
Yep.
And it was bad enough that they had those devastating losses in the AFC Championships back in the 80s. Then they left. And they were gone for 3 years.
In the middle of the night.
Yeah, and it's like, and so now all of a sudden they've come back, and I tell everybody, I've said this on my sports show numerous times, they aren't the same Browns team that as the ones I grew up with. So in the interim, I had to pick a new team. I said, I'm going to pick the Green Bay Packers. Well, it worked out pretty well for me. And then the Packers had a stock offering a couple years ago. So we bought some shares of stock in the Green Bay Packers. So now I'm invested in them both figuratively and literally. And so now I'm a Browns fan who also happens to have the Packers. And like you, I pick another underdog team. With me, it's the Kansas City Chiefs. I'd like to see them do well. But that's what years and years of ineptitude will do to you as a sports fan, where you go, I'll keep my team, but I got to have somebody else here that I can have some fun with. And it's a perfectly natural reaction, believe me.
Yeah, and you know what? That also goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning with our bands in the 70s. In the 70s, we had that one band that we were loyal to because we weren't exposed. It was too expensive to be exposed to all the other bands, and radio didn't always play the music we liked. And now with the internet, we have KISS, that's our band, but now we have these little bands on the side that we go, oh yeah, I'll check out Gothard. Hey, why not? And then of course you mentioned hockey.
Yeah.
I grew up living next to Ken Dryden from the
Wow. Not bad at all.
No, not a bad story, and I'll tell you a couple of Ken Dryden things, and I'll also quickly tell you how I became a Washington Redskins fan. Which do you want first, my Ken Dryden story or how I became the Washington Redskins fan?
Let's start with the Redskins because Dryden, that's such a huge name in both hockey and sports overall. We're going to save him as the headline act. So let's go with the Redskins. They can open the show, and then we'll close with Ken Dryden.
Okay, so Redskins real quick. My mom had been sent down on a business trip to Washington that year that they played the Miami Dolphins in the Super Bowl. So I guess this was January of 81 or January of 82?
82 sounds right, yeah.
And back then I had always been a Terry Bradshaw, Pittsburgh Steelers kind of guy, Lynn Swann, great team. Fantastic team.
One of the best ever, yeah.
And so here I am in Washington. My mom's basically at work. We're at the Watergate Hotel, which of course is the hotel, right, in Washington because of the scandals with Nixon and the whole thing. And it's Super Bowl, and there's no TV in the room, so I'm in the kitchen with, I guess they were Mexican cooks or something. They certainly weren't Americans, or they certainly didn't speak English. Around, and of course, how old was I at the time? I guess I was 13 or 14. I wasn't, crowded around this little black and white TV. It must have been a 12-inch or a tiny TV. And it was all scratchy and snowy because it had the rabbit ears. And so I'm sitting at the Watergate Hotel watching the Washington Redskins on this little black and white crappy TV. And, of course, they won the Super Bowl, and the entire hotel exploded, figuratively, of course. And then we left the hotel, and the town was alive. And, of course, these were in the days where celebrations didn't include burning your city. It just meant you got happy and you ran outside and you screamed real loud and you honked your horn. And so all of that stuff put together, being there and being able to buy a Washington Redskins won a championship T-shirt in Washington the day they won it. It just was sort of very cosmic. And, of course, through the 80s with Theismann, they went back. They won a couple more. That was it. That's how I became a Washington fan. I just happened to be in Washington the day they won a Super Bowl, I think that'll make pretty much anybody a fan of any team.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a great story.
It was just a fun moment in my life, and of course, let's get back to Ken Dryden. Ken Dryden lived next to me. The school I went to get from his house to my house, I would have to, or to get to the school, I would go to school, the bell would ring, I would cut across his lawn to get to my lawn. And, at Halloween, you'd go trick-or-treating, and he wouldn't throw candy in your bag. He would throw Montreal Canadian hockey pucks.
Nice.
And listen, we're talking 75, 76, 77, 78. First of all, they were winning Stanley Cups.
Yeah.
Back to back to back to back to back. Merchandise wasn't what it was today. You might have gotten a Habs T-shirt or a Blackhawks T-shirt, but they didn't sell, the oven mitts and the hockey pucks so to get a Montreal Canadiens hockey puck was almost like getting an ounce of gold thrown into your. And he kept a stack by the door. It was there must have been like 40 or 50. So you had to get to his house early because once the pucks were done, lights out. And nobody was angry. Nobody blamed them. Oh, you could have gotten. No. It was who gets to Ken's house first. And so there was a competition to get to his house first. And of course, we had a bunch of great people living in the neighborhood at the time. Ken Dryden lived next to me. Down the street, we had Bill Stoneman, who was an Expos pitcher, and we had Joe Barnes, who was the Montreal Alouettes quarterback. So we had this.
Wow.
We had this great. We had a guy who threw a no-hitter. The goalie for the Habs and a guy who won a Grey Cup, all within a block of each other back in the day.
Not bad.
What a great place. And Ken, I worked on a TV show years later called The Editors for PBS and The World in Review. And Ken Dryden ended up being a guest. And this was, 1994, maybe, 95. I was no longer the 10-year-old getting a hockey puck for Halloween. I was, in my 20s, and Ken Dryden walked in, and I thought, I'm going to go introduce myself and say, hey, Ken, I live next. And he walked in, and he goes, hey, Mitch Lafon. And I went, what?
Nice.
He goes, yeah, you lived in so-and-so, And he remembered.
Wow.
First of all, how he remembered how this little tiny kid, became this big, tall dude. But Ken is nice and smart, and that's I guess why he's been so successful, because he's just on the ball. And the fact that literally 15 years later he walked in and goes, "Hey, how's it going? And do you still go to the pool?" And it's like I was blown away.
I would imagine so. Yeah.
Another, I through all these rock stars from the Rob Halfords. Between Rob Halford and Ken Dryden, there's just been a lot of great folks that I've met over the years. And that moment on that TV show when I was just a production assistant, and he walked in and he remembered, I'm still flabbergasted. I could have understood him saying, hey, didn't you live in, or your face looks familiar. But he goes, yeah, but... Ken
Dryden walks into the room 15 years later and says, hey, Mitch.
Yeah. It was a really... sort of wow moment. You go, whoa, okay.
Well, and this is
that.
This is Ken Dryden we're talking about here. We're not talking about some guy that was the third goalie on the,
No.
I mean, this is one of the greatest goalies of all time. Wrote what a lot of people think is the greatest sports book of all time.
Yep.
He's Ken Dryden. I mean, if you don't, I'll put it this way: if you're listening to this show and I say Ken Dryden and you don't know who I'm talking about, you're listening to the wrong show. Simple as that.
Yeah.
But
he was a great guy, and where I lived it was on the suburbs of Montreal. Down this, in the next town over, there was Guy Lafleur, and so we would end up at the same grocery store. And what always struck me about Guy Lafleur when I would go down to the, it was called Richard's, the grocery store was called Richard's, is he would smoke like a chimney.
Yeah.
That guy was always smoking. Whenever you'd bump into him at the grocery store, and of course, people smoking at the grocery store in itself is gross, but hey, it was the 70s. The guy was always smoking. You're like, wow, this guy's our top athlete. He's always smoking. And, of course, we had Guy Carbonneau that lived not too far away, Steve Shutt, Chris Spire.
Chris Spire from the Expos, no kidding.
Yeah, Chris
nice.
Spire lived. Gary Carter was having a house built here and then got traded to the Mets. And I grew up in an area with just a lot of sports personalities that didn't live, I would say, I was going to say a 15-kilometer radius. So let's talk like a 10-mile radius from my house at the time. A lot of sports people were living in it.
I wanted to bring up two things that we brought up here. First, the smoking thing. I remember I was watching an interview with Ken Stabler back when I was a kid. And he was talking about one of the players, and I don't remember what they were talking about, what the subject was or anything else, but the one thing that's always stuck with me all these years later was he said, yeah, he's the guy that goes out and gets my cigarettes for me. And it blew my mind. I thought, Ken Stabler, NFL quarterback, and he smokes cigarettes? How do you do that? But a lot of guys back then smoked, the athletes. I don't know. I mean, they may still today. I don't know. But, I'm sure they make a bigger effort to hide it now if they do. But back then, as I learned as I grew older, that was a pretty common occurrence that athletes would smoke. And so, it floored me, just like I imagine it did with it's just, wow. And then the Ken Dryden hockey puck thing, with the merchandise. And the back in those days, in the 70s, it just was not prevalent like it is now.
No, absolutely not.
To have a Canadiens hockey puck, that, like you said, that was like pure gold. Or to have a jersey or anything like that, because you just couldn't get it anywhere.
You could, and I know that the one of the kids that I was friends with in the neighborhood. Now, I never witnessed this myself, but he assures me it's true. He would shovel his driveway and mow his lawn, in the summer and the winter, and his payment would be a Ken Dryden hockey stick or a goalie stick, and Ken would sign it. And he told me that he ended up with like 3 or 4 or 5 of these things.
Wow!
Never went to the guy's house, never saw it, but if he's handing out hockey pucks, I can see him handing out goalie sticks. And people will say, oh, cheap bastard, he should have just paid you the $20. You don't understand. When you're a kid and the guy on the 5-time Stanley Cup championship team gives you a puck rather than candy or gives you a stick rather than $20, you love it.
Oh,
and you want more.
Absolutely, yeah. It would be the $20, like say today, you'd have forgotten all about. But that hockey stick, the autographed stick or a puck, you're going to remember that forever.
Yeah, well, here I am in 2014 telling you the Halloween puck story.
Right.
And had he given me a Mars bar, I never would have mentioned it. I never would have said, hey, I got a Mars bar from Ken Dryden. People are going to, and we don't care.
I'm assuming you still have the pucks, right?
Yeah, somewhere.
Oh, okay, good. Because that would just be a shame if you didn't. But
yeah, I have a lot of stuff put away in boxes, and sometimes I unpack them and I go, oh, yeah, look at that.
Well, real quick, and we'll wrap it up with this. We're talking about the sports memorabilia, but I wanted to ask you, in all the years of the interviews and all that, do you have a pretty decent collection of rock memorabilia, or is that something that your career just didn't, you know what I mean? Like you weren't able to come up with a lot of that stuff, or do you? I mean, I know you had the stuff, the thing you used to do on the KISS podcast, where you'd bring stuff out from your KISS collection. But what about other things like guitar picks and whatever over the years?
Yeah, I do have. In fact, I got a couple of guitar picks sitting in front of me here. One a Judas Priest one. Before my kids were born and I was doing interviews, I always thought that it was, and this is my own belief, that it was a professional courtesy to not hassle the people and say, can I have an autograph? Can I have a picture? And then when my kids were born, for some reason, I got it into my mind, and I would say, can I get an autograph for my daughter? And I really did do it for them. I kept a collection where there's a bunch of CDs that say to Jada. There's a bunch of CDs that say to Ryan or stuff. And I've kept them separate. And eventually I guess I'll give it to them. But so I don't have that much stuff, but I do have a lot of signed CDs and tour books, and I certainly haven't been in the pit to take pictures of all these bands at shows. I've got an extensive guitar pick collection, good couple hundred. Last year when we went out to see KISS, not on the Def Leppard tour, but the tour last year, one of the roadies came up and gave Jada and Ryan a bunch of guitar picks and drumsticks and a whole bunch of stuff. And Eric Singer provided a bunch of stuff to them too. So yeah, we got a lot of stuff. I don't have a museum because I'm not into displaying the stuff. I bring it home and I sort of stick it in a box, which people will go, what? Because at some point it just becomes overwhelming. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff. What I like is that a lot of the stuff is unique. There's not a lot of pictures that people have of, I got a picture of, my daughter with George Thorogood or Rob Halford or, there's a lot of unique stuff that you can't buy in a store, which is kind of cool. And, I just got a great thing sent to me from the folks in Guns N' Roses or Axl's band, whatever you want to call it. They have a tour jacket that is sponsored by Monster energy drink, and you can't buy it anywhere. It's my favorite jacket, and they sent it to me free of charge, and I love it. I just, I love, that's the kind of thing I like, and I wear it. People go, well, you should frame it and stick it on the wall, and
nah,
you shouldn't. I go, no, dude, I'm going to use it, and when it's used up and there's 18 million holes in it, well, so be it. I love that. That's the kind of stuff I love.
Yeah, that's kind of more like what I was asking, because I know that when I worked in radio, we would get, we would get like gold records and that kind of stuff. And it just, but you're right though. It just, after a while, I don't know if you just become jaded and you go, it's not that big a deal anymore, or what, but it just becomes overwhelming. I mean, I used to have my house decorated with all the stuff I'd collected over all the years, and I thought, this is just ridiculous. And I don't get rid of it, but I box it away, and it's all, like you. It's around here somewhere. It's the best I could tell you.
Yeah, and you don't want to have your house be just a bunch of, you still want your house to be a house. I mean, you got to respect that my wife lives here,
exactly.
The 2 kids lived here. And listen, I'm getting away with a Kiss Destroyer shower curtain, so we can't push too much,
right?
But no, that's the stuff I love, and. Yeah, it does become overwhelming. So you got to just sort of put it away, and it's not a question of getting jaded. It's a question of your entire life can't just be a rock and roll museum.
Right.
You sort of have to also like football and like hockey and enjoy eating Indian food at the buffet kind of thing. But I did want to say the one thing that I still get a kick out of. And I do keep that stuff apart, is when my name appears in the booklet of a CD. That still tickles my fancy.
That's cool. I've not had any credits in a big name CD, but a few friends of mine have put out CDs and put me in like the thank yous or whatever. And it's, there's CDs that if they sell 100 copies, it would be a lot, but I was really touched by it.
Yeah.
And it's just cool to see. Yeah. So that is a neat thing to have happen. And you, well, real quick.
Especially when it's unexpected. Like,
right.
The band Accept in their last album, not the one this year, but in Stalingrad, I bought the album from Japan. I spent the import price. I had a bonus track, blah, blah, blah. And I flip open the booklet and I'm reading through it and it says, and we'd like to thank Mitch Lafon. I went, whoa, wait a minute. Nobody told me about that. That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Those are the moments that, I love. That's the kind of stuff I love.
Cool. Well, Mitch, I want to tell you, it's been great talking to you. I don't want to keep you anymore tonight. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. See, I'm very good at talking.
Yes, you are.
But we've done just about 2 hours.
Yeah, we have. It's great. I told you when we started, I wouldn't need you for more than an hour, but I wasn't going to tell you to shut up either. So, a lot of great.
I'll talk all night.
A lot of great stuff, but check it out. It's One-on-One with Mitch Lafon. You can find it on Facebook, on YouTube. Any other sites we should go to?
Yeah, subscribe to the podcast if you dare.
Yeah, it's on iTunes. I'm assuming.
Let me try this. Please subscribe to the podcast. It is on iTunes.
Okay, I can run them off here. We got Spreaker, iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, iHeartRadio. TuneIn. There you go.
Yeah, there you go. And of course, the streaming service Deezer just bought Stitcher, so you'll be able to get it as part of a subscription based service, Deezer, which is sort of like RDO and Spotify. They bought Stitcher, so all the podcasts on there are going to be on the on the Deezer streaming service at some point. So,
that's cool, because that means all of my podcasts will be on there as well. There we go. Yeah.
Absolutely. They bought the 35,000 podcasts and the whole Stitcher platform. And so, you and me are going to be on Deezer. So people are going to have this as part of their streaming service. And, hey, why not?
Cool. All right. Well, Mitch, thanks a lot. We appreciate your time. And you're welcome to come back anytime.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it again someday. And definitely, come on one-on-one, and we'll do, because, at the beginning of every show, we do a talk-up. So come on the show and do a talk-up with me, and we'll talk the band du jour, whoever they happen to be on that episode.
I would love to.
Absolute pleasure.
All right, man. Thanks.
Talk to you soon.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Classic Rockcast. You can check out One-on-One with Mitch Lafon on iTunes, Stitcher, and YouTube. For more episodes of the Classic Rockcast, along with Basically a Sports Show, Basically a Geek Show, and Basically a Football Show, go to our website, basicallyasportshow.com. You can also find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, and YouTube. Okay, that's going to do it. We'll see you next time right here on the Classic Rockcast.
Yeah!